Good morning, everyone. The reading today comes from 1 Corinthians 1, verses 18 to 25. For the message about the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart. Where is the one who is wise? Where is the scholar? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom, God decided through the foolishness of the proclamation to save those who believe. For Jews ask for signs and Greeks desire wisdom, but we proclaim Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. But to those who are the called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God. For God's foolishness is wiser than human wisdom, and God's weakness is stronger than human strength. And the second reading comes from John 2, verses 13 to 22. The Passover of the Jews was near, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple he found people selling cattle, sheep and doves, and the money changers seated at their tables. Making a whip of cords, he drove all of them out of the temple, with the sheep and the cattle. He also poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. He told those who were selling the doves, "Take these things out of here. Stop making my Father's house a marketplace." His disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." The Jews then said to him, "What sign can you show us for doing this?" Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The Jews then said, "This temple has been under construction for 46 years, and will you raise it up in 3 days?" This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
We're in the season of Lent, and we of course are leading towards Easter. And the cross seems like, for the last 2,000 years, seems like foolishness. The cross is a way of God, I guess, acting or God achieving what God wants to achieve will seem like foolishness to all sorts of people. It's hard to imagine that, and it would have been hard to imagine in Jesus' time, Paul's time as he wrote the letter to the Corinthians. It would be hard to try and present a case that said that God is present in shame, because crosses were for criminals. Crosses were for people whose causes had been lost. The cross was the way of the power of the time saying, "We've got you, we own you." So to talk of a cross would seem like foolishness. It would seem like foolishness to talk of a cross, because where do you find God in punishment? Where do you find God in losing to the power of your time? Where do you find God in holding firm in the middle of a struggle? That life is a struggle anyway. Because the number of people I talk to who sort of believe that becoming a Christian should mean everything goes smoothly. All the time, every time. Or there's always an exit route to smoothness. Anybody experiencing life that way all the time? No. The foolishness of the cross, in that you face an enemy and you lose. How do you talk that up as a win? Or even just that sense of bearing a burden for the benefit of others. It doesn't make any sense to many, to most. Even the sense of resurrection was a very hard phenomena to explain or to share or to convince people of, that the victory was in resurrection. So the story and talking of the cross just seemed like foolishness. It seemed like foolishness in Jesus' time. It seemed like foolishness to many of Paul's audiences. And dare I say, it seems like foolishness in our time too. Yeah? So what's a fool? It led me to go and sort of do a bit of... I've been thinking about this week a bit about what's a fool. If we're called to be foolish, what's a fool? If we're called to live within this foolishness of God, what does that even mean? And a fool is someone who acts with a lack of judgment. It's different to an idiot, right? An idiot is someone who thinks and then speaks without intelligence or without reason or probably without filter. I'm quoting someone who used to sit amongst us until just recently David used to say this, I've heard him say it, everyone has the right to an opinion, but nobody has the right to ignore the facts. Yeah? Idiocy. So idiots are known by what they think and what they say. What comes out of their mouth. Fools are known by their actions. So today I'm calling you to be a fool for God. But don't be an idiot. Be a fool for God, but don't be an idiot. Where's our foolishness? How's our following in the way of the cross seen as foolishness? If a fool is known by their actions, then really what I'm trying to say to you today, let's let our actions be a disruption to the norm. Let's let other people look at us and say, you know what? They seem different. Let's disrupt people. Let's let our following of the way of Jesus, the victory of the cross in our lives, be a disruptor in our world. Let's let that be our foolishness. There are plenty of norms in this world that need disrupting. I don't mind being a fool if I'm standing there looking a bit different to somebody who's being selfish. I don't mind going against the norm if I'm seen to be standing there or acting in a way that's different to greed. I don't mind being called a fool, and I hope you don't either, if you're disrupting the ways of violence or hatred in our world, or racism. It's everywhere. I don't mind being known as a fool, for being seen to be a bit strange, for being a disruptor against the norm of indifference in our world. That's their problem, it's not mine. That's how indifference works. That's their problem. Let them sort it out. Let them suffer in their lack of, in their disadvantage. That's indifference. They're not my brother, not my sister, not my problem. I don't mind being a disruptor. I don't mind being a fool, seen as a fool for speaking up and for acting where I can when it looks like someone is just being seen as an object. Or not being seen for the loved human being that they are, the value that they hold to God. I don't mind being a disruptor against the grandiose. I don't mind being a disruptor. I try hard. I'm as guilty as this as anybody else of being a reactionary kind of person who just responds with what I cop. So if someone's being a bit cranky with me, I'll be cranky with you. Just giving back what I'm getting. If you're going to blow your stack at me, I'm going to blow my stack at you. You deserve it. That's what you get. That's reactionary. Trying hard to be, and you might be able to think of other things that I can't name here or haven't named here. But there might be things in your life where you go, you know what? I can see that I need to be, that the gospel calls me to stand differently to that and to act differently to that. I'm called into a different space and I will look a little bit abnormal when I do so. Let our actions tell a different story. Let's be fools in that regard. Don't be idiots. Don't just shoot off with our mouths and tell everybody what they should be doing. Let's live it with our lives. Let's be fools. Let's be real good fools. For God's sake. Now, our gospel reading this morning reminds us that Jesus was a disruptor. Not just for the sake of disrupting, not just for standing in the way and being a problem or a nuisance or making life feel like swamp for other people. You know what I mean? Or lantana. There are people who make life feel like it's lantana. You've got to work hard to work with them. And they'll often work against you. I don't mean that. I mean Jesus was a disruptor for the benefit of others. The gospel reading this morning has Jesus in the temple. I quite like it where it turns up in John's gospel. You might notice the difference. We're reading from John chapter 2. In the book of Matthew and the book of Luke, the story of Jesus in the temple turns up in Holy Week, which means it's Jesus' third trip round, like it's his third in his public ministry. It's his third time he's been to the temple with this following. But in the book of John, it's really, really early on. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like it's a really early story in the book. Like John tells this story really early, as if it's a part of Jesus establishing his ministry. Do you see the point I'm making? Really early on, Jesus is in the book of John, Jesus really early on is standing up and saying, no, this is not what God's house is for. No, this is not how you treat people. No, you don't get to use your religious and political and business power to keep people oppressed. Jesus disrupts against the racketeering and the profiteering, masquerading as spiritual practice. Dare I say, Jesus is also, in turning over tables, and I know this story comes across as being about the money, right? And about the business. But what Jesus is also disrupting is a whole way of understanding God. Because what he stops people from doing is trading on the basis of that God is transactional. You know, you go away and take away 2 pigeons or a cattle, they weren't sacrificed. The animals were just there because they weren't sacrificing sheep and cows by that time. They'd narrowed it down to small lives, to small, dispensable kind of pigeons, you know. You used to have to go away and kill pigeons to sacrifice. You needed the blood of 2 pigeons, which was a way of getting right with God. That was a ritual cleansing. And I think what Jesus is something we miss in the story is Jesus is saying is that God doesn't work on that sacrificial basis. I know, some people won't, you don't have to buy that, but I'm just trying to say that God, I think what Jesus is saying here, in one way, is you've got to find a different way to deal with things other than this idea that we're totally separated from God, and you need to sacrifice the innocent to get right. I'd like to think Jesus is kind of in his own way saying, you know, God works a different way to that. That's not how God sees it. So, how do we disrupt? I'd like to think, I know many people buy the Christian message, and I grew up with it certainly, with a large chunk of my Christian faith was knowing what I had to keep away from. You know what I mean? Like my faith was based around, here's the things that will tear you down. Here's how the enemy works. And a lot of my Christian faith was growing up with this sense of fear or just awareness of the evil all around me and making sure I didn't, that I was abstaining from stuff that would drag me into evil. And there's some value in that. But nowhere near enough of my faith in my growing up, I don't think, was spent understanding what will actually bring life. You'll notice in Paul's letter to the Corinthians, it comes up really early. It says, "Those who are perishing." He uses the words. He said, the wisdom of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing. Now that's a first century understanding, and it's one I wish we carried on in the 21st century. Just as strongly. Because what Paul's saying is, this is the difference between abundance and perishing. Is your life abundant or is your life perishing? And I don't just mean a physical perishing. I mean, is your life going through a spiritual, emotional, mental kind of just diminishing, shrinking? Another word in the Greek that's used for it is corrupted. Like, not that you are corrupted and wrong, but in the same way, as I've said before, when you've got a file on your computer that's corrupted, it stops other things from working properly. And that's what Paul's offering here. For those people whose lives are shrinking, who think they've got it all worked out, but they're actually choosing a minimal way a diminished way of living, the cross will seem like foolishness. And for those of us who are choosing and trying to live in an abundant form of life, let's break that open. Let's be disruptors. Right? Now, how do we disrupt? It's not just about what we keep away from. We don't just keep away from greed. We don't just keep away from indifference. We don't just keep away from the grandiose. So what do? How do we explore and find a growing and an abundant life? How does our life not just, live in action? I think there's quite a nice, I'm going to start a list. I want you to keep going in your own mind and complete it for me. But every time we choose to be generous, every time we let our hearts be open to others rather than closed, when we have a generosity of spirit about us, we're being a disrupting influence. Every time we choose kindness, when we find kind words to say, encouraging words to say, we're being a bit different. We're disrupting the norm. Every time we stop and think about the effects of our actions or others' actions on somebody else, we're actually doing something a little bit disruptive. It might call us to act a bit differently, or to stand up on someone else's behalf, or with them. And that's disrupting. Every time we choose patience instead of rush, or demanding an answer or an action from somebody else right away. Every time we choose community, in other words, life with, rather than letting other people do it on their own. Every time we choose compassion and we let that guide our hearts. Every time we choose peace, we're doing something a little bit disruptive. It's not normal in our world. Sadly, it's not normal. Neither is humility. Neither is grace. Accepting that there's a space, a difference between people. And not everyone has to be the same as you or me. Every time we choose inclusion, every time we choose justice, every time we choose to believe that someone may be trying to transform their life, every time we don't take one photo and make that the whole story about somebody, but instead accept that life has many different facades for someone, many different experiences. Now, friends, you may have your own. There's plenty of words in the scriptures that will guide us as to what our lives, disruptive lives, our foolish lives, should look like. And I'm calling you to be fools. Fools for God. Let your lives stand against the norm. Let other people look at you and go, oh gosh, why are you doing that? Why are you choosing to do that? When it's something that you know God's calling us into, to bring life to ourselves or to bring life for others around us. It will seem like foolishness, and for some reason this is God's wisdom in our lives, this call on our lives to disrupt in this kind of way. It may not be about overturning tables in your local cafe or in church, but your life can be a disruptor. And I know many of you already know this because you're living it anyway. And in many ways I'm just encouraging us to keep going that way. But let's be fools. Let's let our actions work for God's love in the world. Let's be those kind of fools. Amen.